The Toronto Blue Jays have found a hidden gem. While there's been lots of conversation about who the Jays missed out on this offseason thus far, missing out on the likes of Juan Soto, Corbin Burns, all of these players, there's one prospect waiting in the wind that could change everything for the Toronto Blue Jays going forward regarding their prospect pool and how their prospect system is seen. We're going to break down exactly who this prospect is and discuss what this means going forward for the Jays, as they have had an extremely disappointing offseason thus far. But before we get to that, folks, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. I know we're all upset that the Jays aren't doing well. I see you guys down below. It's going to be a long offseason, but hopefully the Jays continue to make some more moves. But today, we're going to take a step back and talk about a prospect. But again, hit that subscribe button. About 70% of you who are watching aren't subscribed. Now, we know that the prospect pool is ranked by a bunch of prospect guys 27th in baseball, which is a very bad ranking. And they made a bunch of trades at the deadline. They traded Kikuchi, they traded IKF, they traded Justin Turner, and they really shored up their prospect pool the best they possibly could. Specifically, the Yusei Kikuchi trade, of course, acquiring Jake Bloss, who was one of their prospects, drafted Trey Savage. Their prospect system is looking solid. At least solid compared to what it did before the deadline. It's still one of the worst in baseball. But one player who we've talked about before on this channel, even dating back to a couple of years ago, who is waiting to make a huge outbreak is Alan Roden. And we're going to dive into that. But an article dropped here basically highlighting the Jays have shiny new toys after the trade deadline, but don't overlook these two new prospects. And obviously, most of the talk is about Jake Bloss, about Joey Loperfido, Will Wagner, all these prospects, even Trey Savage, the one, their recent first-round pick there. All these guys who have been playing very well and highly regarded, of course, among the MLB. But there's a couple prospects that are kind of sneaking through the system here that a lot of fans aren't talking about, and they are MLB-ready prospects that are ready to take a next step. And we saw it last season with Spencer Horwitz, and I think we're going to see it again here. So you can see this here. When the Jays turned the page in their attempt for a third straight trip to the postseason after the deadline, they added 13 prospects, which that's a huge amount for the deadline. We talked about Joey Loperfido, Will Wagner, all these guys. We know how good Will Wagner did. Jonathan Clase, who is very solid, can steal a ton of bases. We know Jake Bloss is very solid. And of course, this article dates back, to even mid-season now. And of course, we know that at the deadline, they made a bunch of moves. And I'm bringing up this article for a reason. But this, of course, dates back to mid-season. They thought Jake Bloss was going to be called up. It didn't ultimately happen. But Alan Roden and of course another guy, Kasevich, is two people we're going to talk about today. But you can see this here, and the reason I bring this up is because this is on a podcast, and it kind of goes to show how slept on a lot of these prospects have been. So you see this here. This guy over here has never stopped hitting once in his entire life, and this is Alan Roden speaking out on Kasevich as the teammates sat in the Bison's dugout last weekend, the joint interview, all these different things. He was a great hitter in college. He is a great hitter now, and that's what Kasevich said of Roden, who has an insane season. But the reason I bring this up is I want to go ahead and look at Alan Roden's stats this year, because that is the guy we're going to be talking about primarily in this video. It is Alan Roden. Now, there's a few different things to talk about here. Obviously, we're going to talk about some of the other guys as well, but we think about last season when they made the big move, of course, for Joey Loperfido, for Will Wagner, and how they acquired a lot of these guys. And we obviously thought that Jake Bloss was going to get called up last season, like, this article dropped midseason, like you can see here. But there's a lot of other prospects that the Jays have that have really started to fly under the radar a little bit. And you look at their MLB pipeline, you think about who are in their top prospect list. You can think about who are not, of course, in their top 10, top 20 prospects. We think about Spencer Horwitz, and it's an interesting comparison. Now, as you look at Alan Roden here, last year specifically with New Hampshire and Buffalo, he split time there. Very, very good season. In AAA, he had a 916 OPS. And if you go ahead and look at his OPS throughout his minor league career, and he's only been in there for, 4 years now, and he's 24 years old. Again, similar trajectory to Spencer Horwitz, dating all the way back to his rookie year. His first full season in 2021 was a little bit rough. It wasn't a little bit, was really good, sorry. And then he had a little bit of a low point in 2022, but he was really good. And if you've been keeping up with Alan Roden, we've been keeping up with him on this channel for a while now. He is a really, really good player. And the reason he doesn't get talked about a lot is, of course, you look at who the Jays have had and who they've had in their prospect pool, who they've had kind of being ready to get called up. And you talk about a bunch of these different guys. Jake Bloss was the highlight of it, and Spencer Horwitz for a while was the highlight of who are the Jays going to call up. You look at Alan Roden now, he could really fit into this team. He is primarily an outfielder. He's obviously been rising up the ranks as, Jays prospects. He has been named the minor leaguer of the year. And for someone who hasn't been talked about very much among, Jays fans, on this channel a little bit as well. We obviously know he created a ton of buzz last summer. He came into spring training, did very well, won minor league player of the year. So as you think about how he finished his season, obviously 805 OPS with the Tiger Cats, and then AAA, he absolutely raked. He's the Jays' 12th ranked prospect. But now, as you look at other outfielders who are available for the Jays to play with, you think about Joey Loperfido, obviously Dalton Varsho in center, you have George Springer in right. Things start to get a little bit interesting now because, again, Alan Roden is an outfielder, and that is the main reason he hasn't been called up until this point. They traded for Joey Loperfido. He obviously took over. You think about how well, Alan Roden has done. It's very intriguing. You think all the way back here, Alan Roden has 8 hits in his last 13 at-bats. We think back to August when the season, was kind of lost for the Blue Jays. Unbelievable year, but again, he had so many different hot spurts throughout the season. And again, he's a year older. He hit his way into, he just basically hit the crap out of the ball and turned into one of the best prospects in the Jays system now. But as you start to look at what this means going forward, finishing the season with a, phenomenal OPS, a 916 OPS in AAA, that's very good. You cannot ask for much more than that, especially when you're talking about who else the Jays have. You have outfielders, Joey Loperfido. That one's a little bit, because then the question now is, where do you put Alan Roden regarding outfielders? You have Joey Loperfido. You have Jonathan Clase. You have, of course, George Springer and Dalton Varsho. You also even have, if he returns, Nathan Lucas. There's a lot of different guys here that are competing for a spot, which is exactly why Alan Roden, up until this point, hasn't been given an opportunity. But at the same time, that is just as good of a reason as to why he's not talked about a lot. He is the Jays' hidden gem. You think about, again, I'm going to keep bringing it up. You think about Spencer Horwitz. He was considered a 4A guy, someone who couldn't really crack the big league roster because of his position. And his position, he wasn't great defensively. He had no real, position defensively, and that stopped him from coming up because obviously you had Vladimir Guerrero Jr. running first base / DH. You had Alejandro Kirk and Danny Jansen for a while there, splitting time between DH and catcher. But when you're looking at Alan Roden, they need to force him onto this team and see what he can do. Now, whether that's even for a trade chip going forward. Maybe they trade him this offseason, but he's played so well. He's hit at every single level. You saw in the article I brought up earlier, this is, of course, midway through the season, everyone in the system, every Jays, front office, they love this guy. All his teammates compliment him. He had a great season. He had a stretch where he went 8 for his last 13 in August. He was absolutely mashing the ball. Of course, we were talking about him during this time. It is time we start talking about Alan Roden. You look at the OPS. He's had a couple seasons with over 1,000 OPS and 916 in AAA. He is going to be a huge part of this team. And hopefully this season, assuming he starts the season, battling for a spot, he can be what Spencer Horwitz was to the Jays last season. But let me know down below what your thoughts are on this. Very interesting player. A very strong candidate for being the breakout player for the Toronto Blue Jays. He doesn't hit for a ton of power, which is one of the negatives regarding his game, but he's a solid outfielder. A lot of the Jays outfielders don't have power, but if they decide to somehow miss out on Anthony Santander or Jurickson Profar of the limited options that are remaining, having Alan Roden up would be very interesting. Obviously finished last year with 16 home runs. He doesn't hit for power. That is the biggest flaw in his game. But if you give him an opportunity, maybe you can, move him somewhere in the infield or compensate for the lack of power in other ways by maybe getting a guy like Santander who hits 40 home runs. It'll be interesting to see how they go about converting and seeing how he plays at the big league level. But let me know down below what your thoughts are. He absolutely mashed last year. Everybody was talking about it. Even Kasevich is another guy. I know I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but he's another guy who's ready to go. And Jays are going to be in a very interesting spot as a couple of their top 15 prospects are going to, if the Jays don't make any big signings, they're going to have to rely on these guys to help compete. And I know it's a rough time to be a Jays fan, but let me know down below what your thoughts are on this. We'll see you guys later.